Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek 2009. This video is part of a series of videos where I cover every Star Trek movie 1 week at a time. For this film, I will be covering the 2009 JJ Abrams film simply titled Star Trek. Okay, so let me begin this review from a quote from a media studies professor from Baltimore, near where I grew up. Now, I chose media studies professor rather than critics because this is a bit different than critics. So I went to university, I took media studies courses, and they do more. Critics sort of just analyze the film, say, oh, should you go see it, and should you go see it, or should you not see it, and they put it out on, whatever, newspaper, internet, whatever, to inform people whether or not they should spend their money. Whereas media studies professors more of a look at the the whole structure of the story as they study it, basically. So it's a bit different. But anyway, this is from media studies professor Arnold Bloomberg. Quote, I genuinely still believe that the 2009 Star Trek is one of the stupidest movies I have ever seen in my entire life. That movie is awful on almost every conceivable level. The plot, the structure of the film, the characterization, the action set pieces. It's one of the rare occasions I've ever sat through a movie where I felt like it was insulting my intelligence at every turn. And end quote. So that's he does say a lot more than that, but I just chose that little snippet there because I think that perfectly encapsulates how I feel about this movie, and frankly how I think the movie is objectively. It did feel like it was insulting my intelligence at every turn. Now, so this film is just called Star Trek, and I think that makes it the most ironically named film ever. Because, first of all, I had to refer to it as Star Trek 2009 to distinguish it from the other Star Trek films. Because if I just say Star Trek, you're just like, what Star Trek? Which one? What are you talking about? Because there's so much Star Trek. So, first of all, that was just really dumb of them and arrogant of them, actually, saying, we are Star Trek, fuck everything else. For them to call it Star Trek. But it's the most ironically named film because Star Trek is actually what this film isn't. This film is not Star Trek, and yet they simply just call it what it is not, and it clearly is not Star Trek. It is just some space blockbuster that took the advantage of the rebooting craze and just stole names and property from an established franchise so they can make more money. But I'll get more into that later on. Anyway, let me get back to my experience with the film, because I know many people who like the film or think that I'm just being a butthurt fanboy or whatever will probably say, oh, well, you didn't even give this film a chance. You're just a butthurt fanboy. You didn't like that they would put more action. I hate that straw man, but I'll get to that later. More action, more modernization to the films, and so you decided it sucks because you want to see Patrick Stewart with bad special effects and blah, 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 blah. But that is not the case, not in the least. And here's the thing. When I first heard about this film, I think I was traveling. It was like 2007, 2008. I was on holiday or vacation, as you Americans say. And I was traveling around, and I stopped to use the internet, and I looked up, like, oh, they are going to make another Star Trek movie, and JJ Abrams is going to write and direct. And you know what my first thought was? Wow, that's amazing! That is such good news. That's awesome, because at this stage, of course, Star Trek had been dead since Enterprise, which was a failure. And at this stage, also, my favorite show on television was Lost. I was obsessed with Lost. I loved Lost. I was really hooked on Lost. I think at this stage, I wasn't aware that JJ Abrams didn't really have much to do with Lost anymore. That he basically set it up, directed the first episode, and then turned it over to Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse. But I still associated JJ Abrams with Lost because his name was all over. And plus, like, Damon Lindelof and other people he worked with on Lost was going to be working with him on the new Star Trek film. So I thought, wow, this is going to be amazing. This is like a dream come true. I was like in seventh heaven. I was like, a Star Trek film with the people who created my favorite show on television currently. Did I die and go to heaven? This is amazing. And I heard it was going to be like a prequel taking with like Kirk and Spock when they were in the academy. Now, my reaction to that was, well, that's not the most ideal thing in the world. I would prefer that, they do something a bit more modern, either do new characters or go, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine or whatever. But, if they're going to have to do that, that's actually better than Enterprise, because Enterprise was just ripping off the original series, but just created new characters to be exactly like Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And it's like, well, if you're going to do that, why not just do Kirk, Spock, and McCoy? So that does make empirical sense. So I was all on board with that. The moment is when I first started getting my doubts, though. When I first started getting the hinge of maybe this is not going to be that great, is when the idea of the reboot came in. Now, I talked about this before. I watched the commentary for On First Contact done by Ronald D. Moore and Brenna Braga, and they were talking about how the whole Star Trek franchise needed to be rebooted, kind of like what the DC Comics did, and just start from scratch. And when I heard that, it infuriated me. I was like, you are the biggest fucking idiots that ever existed. That is the exact opposite of what needs to be done with the Star Trek franchise. Star Trek franchise needs to delve deeper into the fucking lore, not wipe it clean. I was so infuriated when I heard that. I was like, if they do that, I am giving up on Star Trek ever. That is disgusting. That is repugnant to me, because the reason why I consider myself such a huge Star Trek fan, what I love most about it is not any particular character, it's not any particular setting, it's not seeing a group of Starfleet officers go off into space on a starship and get into wacky adventures every week. It's the lore, it's the mythology, it's the tangible universe that Star Trek has created, and I love. And fans have, with novels and everything, made it very, very clear what they want to see is to see this universe explored more, expanded upon. What about that alien we met in that one episode? What have they been up to? Or what about this particular alliance? Can we explore the universes more? And that's part of the reason why Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek series, because it explored this universe the most. Like, it had a bunch of different aliens, and each episode would cover something different. Like, to me, they should do something more like that. Like, my idea was to do a series where each episode or each season explored a different aspect of the Star Trek universe. Like, we can go to the Klingons, we can do this. Like, that was what I wanted. So this idea I heard that of rebooting a franchise, that was repugnant. And then when I heard that this new JJ Abrams film would be rewriting and creating their own universe, that's when I got my first hint that something was wrong. But you know what? I still wanted to be fair to this movie. I wanted to like this movie because it was a Star Trek movie and it was done by Abrams, who I like. So I was like, I went in with a positive attitude. I'm like, I'm going to like this film. In fact, once I watched it, I did in fact like it, because I was doing something which I borrowed the term from Chris Tuckman because I really like this term, where he refers to this as phantom menacing, as watching a film and wanting to like it so much that you convince yourself that you like it, you convince yourself that it's good, even though it isn't. And it's not till years later where you're able to like look at it objectively and get over the fact that you wanted it to be good and accept it for what it really is, and realize it actually sucks, like with the Phantom Menace. Because if you go back and watch the reviews and fan reactions of the Phantom Menace when it first came out, people loved it. It wasn't until years later people started to come to terms with reality, and it's like, this movie actually sucks. And I, in fact, did do that with The Phantom Menace. And I did that with this film as well. It actually didn't take me that long to realize it sucked. My brother, who I talked about before, he has his own channel, Tomko, he realized that it sucked immediately. And I remember getting to arguments about it and being like, well, but he actually helped me sort of realize and see that, yeah, this movie was not very good. Yeah, so anyway, a lot of things that people bring up, I'll get to some of the straw mans later, But a lot of people bring up to say, "Oh, Abrams just wanted to do Star Wars," and that's true. And how this movie looks a lot like Star Wars and feels more like a Star Wars movie than a Star Trek movie. But I don't think that doesn't accurately describe my issues with this film, because I think to call this movie a Star Wars film is kind of insulting to Star Wars, to be perfectly frank. Although I would say that it does show that Abrams is better suited for a Star Wars film, which is probably why Force Awakens was actually fairly decent, because that was a better fit, and he actually didn't really know anything about Star Trek. And he even said visually, like, his whole idea was to make it more like a Star Wars film, and that maybe that would make it a more profitable blockbuster. And basically, that is the whole concept behind this film. What's profitable? What's going to make the most money? And that's all this film is about. It's a shallow shell that is just a shameless cash grab for studios to make money. And that's basically describes this film perfectly. But anyway, I'll get more into that later. The reception of this film still puzzles me to this day. It has I think 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. And even a lot of critics, a lot of people, YouTube personalities I see who consider themselves Star Trek fans will say this is one of the better Star Trek movies and hold it up in really high esteem and high regard. And I'm still puzzled by this, because I think objectively speaking, I'll get more into this later, there's a lot of flaws. Just leave apart that this whole film is just a shameless cash grab that's pissing on the legacy of Star Trek. Just leave that aside. Just ignore that. Pretend that doesn't exist. This movie has tons of flaws. Structurally, script writing wise, character development, the film is very poorly constructed, and it's all over the place. So it's really, I don't really get why people love this film so much. It's the media studies professor I quoted earlier, Arnold Bloomberg. He also said that it was the reception of this film and how much praise it gets, it's like living in a bizarro world. In fact, he extended that to Into Darkness, because he liked Into Darkness, thought it was a much superior film than 2009, said the fact that everyone seems to hate on Into Darkness and like 2009 is but he's living in a bizarro world. It's things are upside down, topsy-turvy. Why this film is actually decent is getting shit on, and the one that sucks is being praised. And I totally agree with that. But I'll get more into that next week with Into Darkness, which I think is a far superior film, and next week I'll get into the details and the reasons why. So a lot of times, throughout my channel, I shit on the reboots and the JJ Abrams reboots, but really it's this film in particular. Into Darkness isn't perfect, and I have issues with that too, which I'll get to next week. But it's mainly, and Beyond I actually liked, and I'll get to that in 2 weeks. So it's mainly just this film. When I say this shameless reboot, cash grab, modern bullshit, it's mainly aimed specifically at this one film, which is not good. Now, let me get into this thing about the Kelvin timeline. And this is the whole thing about the reboot. And I remember reading some articles from some of the arrogant fuckheads, producers of this film, and they were saying well, your DVDs and your movies that you own still exist. Yeah, great. That's just a great way of looking at it. Fuck you. Sorry, but no. Taking a beloved franchise of lore, mystery, and this established world, and just wiping it aside, and creating this parallel universe. It's why do I care? Why do I care about this fake parallel universe I'm not familiar with? There's not tangible, nothing in this universe seems to make sense. It's just, and I talked about this before, of course, this is lazy. This is the pinnacle of lazy writing. I can't believe some critics actually praise this. Oh, this is such a bold new move. No, it's lazy. It is lazy because instead of trying to work in the established universe, instead of trying to be true to canon. Instead of keeping to the spirit of Star Trek, they're like, oh, fuck everything that came before. I just want to steal the names, steal the property, name recognition. Kirk, Star Trek, let's steal those names and let's just make something totally new that has nothing to do with anything that came before. In fact, let's just wipe out all history of established history that people have been spending decades of their lives on, so we can just do whatever the fuck we want because I'm too lazy to work in an established universe. That's basically what it is. Now, and the whole concept of the Kelvin timeline, or having an alternate timeline be the main focus, I think is kind of destroyed a lot of the mindset, the fan mindset of the Star Trek universe and the other franchises, where it seemed as a norm, where like some people with Discovery were like, oh, well, I would have liked this is better if it was an alternate timeline. Or some other people were like thinking, oh, this isn't an alternate timeline because they're not acting like, and there's this little thing off here that's not fitting into canon, so it must be an alternate timeline. Or other people like, oh, they're shitting on canon, so this would be better if they're alternate timeline. Fuck alternate timelines! The whole concept ruined. There should be no such thing as an entire show or entire movie that's taking place in a parallel universe, alternate timeline, just so because the writers are too fucking lazy to freaking come up to stick to canon and come up with something original. These motherfuckers just pissed me off, and I just want to the fucking die. No fucking alternate timeline. God damn it, motherfucker! God. So anyway, the whole idea of having a whole show or movie take it's a mindset that I think has kind of ruined some of the fan perception of Star Trek franchise going forward. Like, the damage this film has done to the entire franchise is pretty bad, and I hope there comes a day where we can forget about this whole Prime universe or Kelvin. Everything's Prime. Kelvin doesn't exist. It's total bullshit. Nothing else exists. Like, Mirror is something that we visit. It's fun. We visit it from time to time, but we're not going to set an entire show or movie there. And because it's Prime is it. And we shouldn't even call it Prime. It's Star Trek. It is Star Trek. Call for what it is. But, so anyway, I do hope, like, they're talking about doing another film, a fourth Star Trek film with bringing back Chris Hemsworth, who played Kirk's dad in this film. It was before he was a huge star. Now he's a huge star. They want to bring him back. And so there's speculation that they might erase the Kelvin timeline. Oh, God. I can't tell you how much I hope this is true. I really hope they do this beyond. Let's just move past this whole Kelvin, different timeline, BS, and focus on Star Trek, aka the Prime timeline. Anyway, getting more into this film, the sets in this film are horrible. These are really bad sets, like where the bridge and like the different command centers on the Starfleet ships and the Enterprise. It's too busy. It's just like 3 or 4 different screens, and there's all the. I know they want to make it more like a functional command center, but it just, like a lot of things in this film, it obliterates the senses. It's just like too much to take in. Like, Star Trek before, up to this point, knew how to construct a set. They knew how to do it so it was sleek. It was, you could get a sense of geography. You have no sense of geography in this film, not just with sets, but also the action sequences, where ships are relative to each other. There's no sense of geography. It's just, it obliterates the senses. It attacks the senses. There's no tangible universe here. But anyway, so Yeah, I do think that this film, 2009, is the worst of the reboot films by far. As I talked about, it's one of the worst films. I don't consider this Star Trek. Like Into Darkness is kind of Star Trek in the sense that it's a cover band. Like sometimes I refer to the reboots as the cover band, but that's more of just Into Darkness. Really, this one isn't even a cover band. It's just a shameless cash grab that steals established names and property in order to rake in the dough. So this film is not Star Trek. Beyond is completely Star Trek, and I'll get to that more when I get to Beyond. And Into Darkness, in the sense that it's a cover band, sure. This one, not in the least. But the thing is I know I get a lot of comments, a lot of people saying, well, you just don't like this film because you're just butthurt fanboy, and you just don't like that it's doing something different and putting action in Star Trek. All right, that's a straw man. There's been tons of actions in Star Trek. A lot of people were saying this about Discovery, which I think is Star Trek, and I do like it, and I think it stays true to the ideals of Star Trek, even though it has a lot of action and dark tones. Deep Space Nine had a lot of action and dark tones. That's very much Star Trek. First Contact had a lot of, well, that maybe not a good. Nemesis. I love Nemesis. I made a video about how Nemesis is a far superior movie than this film. That had a lot of action in it. So it doesn't, and it was modernized. That was modernized. Discovery is modernized. Enterprise was a bit modernized. The last two seasons, anyway, the ones that were good, the ones with a lot of action in it. So that is such a ridiculous, stupid straw man. Oh, you just don't like action? No, I just don't like that it has no good plot, that the writing's horrible, that the character development is horrible, that completely it presents a universe that makes absolutely no sense. It completely takes all the tenets and values of Star Trek and just pisses all over them. That's what I don't like. But that being said, so there's many people think, oh, well, you just don't like it because it has the name Star Trek. Well, let's suppose there's this parallel universe where this film came out where it didn't have the title Star Trek. In fact, let's just say that in this parallel universe, Star Trek doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as Star Trek. It never existed. But this film, as it is exactly the same. It's the exact same film that we know, except there's no such thing as Star Trek in this universe. So let's say that this film is called Random Space Blockbuster. Okay, so there's this film called Random Space Blockbuster, and it's exactly the same, except there's no established franchise. It is an independent sci-fi film. So I wonder, what would I think about it then? Well, why don't we actually have a look? Let's go to this parallel universe and see what my review of Random Space Blockbuster would be. Hello and welcome to Magic of Forever's reviews. I'm Mike and I'm here to review the 2009 film Random Space Blockbuster. Now, Random Space Blockbuster is a film that's directed by JJ Abrams, starring Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto, and guest appearance by some actor named Leonard Nimoy. I'd never heard of him before, but the movie presents him like I should know who he is. I think there's a guy I saw in Fringe, but anyway, so this movie has been getting a lot of praise from critics. A lot of people, it has a really high Rotten Tomatoes score, and a lot of critics say this is a great film. And it was interesting that we did get a standalone science fiction blockbuster around this time period, because typically around this time period every single movie coming out was attached to a big franchise like Marvel or Star Wars or whatever, but so it was kind of risky to do an original sci-fi piece. And if you know me, I love science fiction, so I went out and saw it and see how it went. And I gotta say, I disagree with the hype around this movie. I think it is a bit overhyped. It's not as great as a lot of the critics were saying. I was actually a bit disappointed, and I actually highly disagree with them on many cases. I mean, that being said, it's not a terrible film. It's definitely been worse, but it has a lot of issues, which I think for some reason the critics seem to gloss over. Well, anyway, so this movie, they never mention when exactly it's set, but from the tone of we get the, this little, when the main character, I think Jim Kirk or James Kirk, something like that. When he was a kid, he was listening to like Beastie Boys and driving a car, and then we see him as an adult. He's riding a motorcycle, so we can kind of infer that this future is not that far away, maybe 100 years. But then we see them in space, and they have like they're meeting with aliens. And apparently, Earth is like a part of some galactic alliance. I think it's called Federation or Federate or something like that. But anyway, so they're part of this alliance, and there's all these different aliens that have these high tech ships. So that kind of suggests that it's even further in the future, because I don't see how we could advance that far in just 100 years. But the culture and the tone and the way that people acts like it's not that far in the future. So my guess is that it's something like Stargate, where, if you watch Stargate SG-1, eventually in the later seasons they have all these ships and they fly through space, but it's actually set in contemporary times because they find alien technology. So my guess is like maybe during the present time, maybe 2009, some aliens came and visited them and gave them this super high-tech technology, and sort of allowed humans to advance a lot faster. At least that's my guess, apparently. And apparently they sort of rule individually. Each planet has its own government, but they formed like an armada to police people. I mean, talking what's his face, Pike, what he says, that's the impression I get, that there's a space military called Starfleet that polices a lot of different space people. I don't know, they seem a bit authoritarian to me, but I don't know. And, they all act like, the people in Starfleet act like sort of asshole midshipmen, and like, they kind of like stereotypical, not friendly military and stuff like that. So I get the feeling it's kind of an authoritarian society. But, so anyway, apparently like Starfleet, when Jim Kirk, whatever, when he was a kid, he his father, well, when he was being born, his father got killed by this super huge ship from the future, I think. So this one is even further from the future. I didn't really get to deal with them. There's some aliens that are tattoos. They have maybe that's their alien, they come from a planet where everyone's born with tattoos on their heads. I don't know. But they're called the Romulans, apparently. And I didn't really get what the deal with, because I don't know. It just, none of that really made any sense. But anyway, so these aliens, I don't know, because they, in present time, Kirk and Spock and the other people seem to know who the Romulans were, yet these Romulans were from the future, so they seemed a bit different than the ones they were familiar with. So it seemed like they were kind of friends. I don't know. I didn't really get that. But anyway, so this guy named Nero, he comes back and he kills the Starfleet for some reason. He kills Kirk's father. And then he goes on a quest to destroy Vulcan, which is a planet where Spock is from. I guess they're kind of aligned with Starfleet because Spock is in Starfleet, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, so they get this. So the Romulans, or the Nero guy, he wants to destroy Vulcan and then destroy Earth, and sort of wipe out the worlds associated with Starfleet, because apparently he's from the future, and Spock, when he was an old man, tried to save his world and he failed. So that way he wants to go and wipe out Spock's world, just because I guess trying is not good enough. You have to try harder. I don't really get that. Maybe. I don't know why he doesn't try to actually save his world. Why he doesn't try to travel, because time travel is obviously possible in this universe. So why doesn't he try to find a way to travel back to his time, or maybe just go back to his home planet in this time and warn everyone that, hey, this disaster is going to happen. Let's start preparing for it now to make sure it doesn't happen. But apparently, like, this guy is crazy, and he apparently doesn't actually care about saving his wife or his own people, because he just wants to go and kill people. So he's already he was already a homicidal maniac, I guess, who has a team of followers who follow him around. Because instead of actually trying to save his world, he just wants to destroy other worlds or whatever. But anyway, so he goes and he destroys Vulcan, and then so we follow Kirk, Spock, and a group of cadets who are just out of the academy. And apparently, in this universe, they just give kids starships to fly around. Apparently, like there are no like adult crews or whatever, or I guess they were off doing important things. They couldn't be around to protect their home worlds, the base home worlds. But anyway, so they just have a bunch of kids in academy go, and they only have like one adult on the ship, and the kids all take over because the adult has to go and get captured. So we have a group of kids. I guess I don't know what happened to all the experienced adults, but whatever. We have a bunch of kids in the academy flying around, and apparently the structure of this organization seems very fit and loose, where anyone can be captain. Like, they swap captain and first officer. Like, you're first officer, now you're captain. And anyway, that's how the Starfleet organization works. It didn't come off to me as a realistic organization. But regardless of all that, let me get into some of the positives of this film. So, this actually, I can kind of see why people were enthralled with this film, because there were moments where it's really engaging and really thrilling. Like, it flows sort of kinetically. It has an energy to it that's, I guess, it's kind of infectious, where it just flows from one to another. And some of these action scenes actually are really good. Like, the opening sequence, I have to say, was amazing. It did actually bring a tear to my eye when Kirk's father died, and he was talking to his wife after she just gave birth, and like, he knew that he was about to sacrifice his life, and they were sort of chit-chatting. That was really good written dialogue. The music underneath it was really good. It was a really well sold emotional scene that played out really well. Now, the space battle itself, of course, I'll get to that later. But other than that, the scene was really good, but then the film it kind of went downhill after that. Well, it introduces us to the two main characters, I guess, Kirk and Spock. We then flash over to this other planet called Vulcan, where we meet Spock, and he's apparently half Vulcan, half human, and other Vulcans pick on him. Like, that was very good character development. Like, I got a really good sense of who this character was, and I got a sense of who Jim Kirk grew up to be, because he was a rebellious kid, because he had lost his father and apparently didn't get along with his parents or his uncles or whoever was taking care of him. Maybe that was his stepdad. I don't know. They weren't very clear about that. But anyway, he grows up to be this rebellious motorcycle guy, and he meets this Starfleet captain who is friends with his father, and tries to get him to join up to Starfleet Academy, and they join up, and there he meets Spock, who apparently these two are like really enemies. They don't like each other at all, because Spock is like, he's, the Vulcan ways to be all logical and emotionless and whatever, and that kind of pisses off Kirk, who's all full of emotions, and then he hits on this other girl, Horror, I think her name was. They made a joke about never saying her first name, like, we really care. But anyway, she's apparently dating Spock, and so Kirk feels like an idiot when he's hitting on her the whole time. And then there's a few other people that kind of just throw in at you, like this guy named Chekhov, who has a really strong Russian accent people can't understand. I mean, why they're still, if you think they had this fleet where these aliens and stuff, you think they wouldn't be making fun of Russians and their heavy accents, but whatever. And there's this guy named Sulu, who apparently is not that good of a pilot, because he fucks up something very simple, and the other guy was sick or whatever, but then all of a sudden they're putting him in command of the ship. I didn't really get that. But anyway, and he goes on some adventures or whatever, and then towards the end of the movie, they meet this other guy. He just pops up out of nowhere, and he's there for comic relief, I guess. He's supposed to be this brilliant engineer, but all he does is stand there and crack jokes. And then all of a sudden, they're putting him in charge of all this stuff where they just met him, so that didn't make any sense either. But anyway, yeah, but I did like the opening sequence, and as I said, this movie did have good music. From time to time, the music did kind of get a bit cliche, a bit too da-da-da-da, like hero type, which sounds like something from the 60s or 70s. But when it was trying to be emotionally impactful, like for example, the opening scene where Kirk's father was dying, that was really great. So it can be good when it wants to. I think in other parts it just didn't rein it in very well. And I will say, this film was kind of like a collection of action sequences. As I said, it had this kinetic energy, but it didn't really form a coherent plot, if you know what I'm saying. It's just here's an action scene, action scene, action scene, action scene, action scene. And some of these action scenes worked and some didn't. I really liked the scene where there was that drill going into Vulcan, and then Kirk and Sulu and some random guy who just is an idiot and died, which is kind of dumb. But anyway, they parachute down and they try to fight off the Romulans and stuff. That was actually that was one of the better action scenes I've ever seen. It was really intense, the whole energy involved, and how Kirk had to, when Sulu fell at the end, he had to jump and catch him, and Chekhov had to run and do the transporter while they were flying in midair. Transporters it's like a teleporter that can teleport one person from one place to the other. Anyway, that was cool. I really did enjoy that. I think that whole action sequence was really well filmed, really well made, and it was really intense. But the problem is that the film overall didn't form a well coherent plot. And I don't know, to me, and this is just my speculation, a lot of these critics and people who love the film were sort of just bedazzled by the kinetic energy and some of the good action sequences, some of the good emotional sequences, but they're not really looking at the big picture and how this story doesn't actually make any sense. And so, and also, not all the action scenes work is another important point, is that because, as I said, the space battles, it reminded me of a Transformers movie or something like that, because we had all these crappy movies around this time in the 2000s where it would throw a bunch of CGI at you. It was and you have no sense of geography, you have no sense of Star Wars, for example. Even though there's tons of ships fighting, you had a clear sense of geography of where the battle was going and which ships were fighting who. Where here was just a total total explosion of just things everywhere. You have no sense of who was firing on who and what was going, and it just obliterated the senses. And I hate. This is not good special effects. This is not good battles. This kind of bull crap is what they did in the 2000s, and that's why the Transformer, even the first one. Some people say, "Oh, the first Transformer movies is good." I can't watch it. It's unwatchable to me because it's just like diarrhea of explosions on the screen, and I have no idea what the fuck is going on. And it's the same thing here with their space battles. It's I don't get, it's not good filmmaking at all, and I totally disagree. I don't know why all these critics who love this film can't see that. But anyway, as I said, some of the battle scenes did work, but the phaser fight or fight where they have these lasers or whatever, they're shooting guns at each other at the end of the film, that was a bit silly, to be honest. I mean, it was okay, but it was just so stereotypical. I was just yawning during that scene. But anyway, then we get so I'll get to the characters and how they don't work, but apparently, Spock, shoots Kirk out because these two obviously really hate each other. He shoots him out onto his ice planet, and he comes across these monsters. It's just like, why is this happening? This is what I mean. Why it's a collection of action scenes that have no like cohesion whatsoever. Like, why are we seeing this? Why are we watching these monsters just so they can show off their CGI? It's just really dumb. And then he meets like the old version of Spock, and I don't really like. I don't. Just seemed to just come out of nowhere. Now, if this was an established franchise, I could see this as like kind of pandering. Oh, here's this old guy that you know from before. But since this is a new property, this makes no sense. Like, I don't really get this. And so old Spock like puts his hand on his head. I guess he can communicate telepathically or something. And we get these flashbacks. It's a very clunky, very fast way to do exposition. And they thought, well, we'll have it so old Spock's voice will come from different, like they did a surround sound thing where it's like, I did this and I did that, and they did like reverbs on his voice and say, oh, so this exposition is cool because his voice is going, but that doesn't change the fact that this is what I mean. This whole movie is like trying to bedazzle you with this effect so you don't notice how crappy this plot is written, how crappy the story is written, how the plot doesn't actually flow or make any sense. But anyway, so his voice goes blah 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 blah, but really what it is just like very fast exposition. It's just a very fast way to say, hey, here's the story, because we're too lazy to actually come up with a very good story. Now, why? So it explains that, the whole thing about the Nero and why he came back in time, and apparently he came back 20 years before Spock did, and after he killed Kirk's father, he just sat on his hands and waited for like 20 years for Spock to show up. And what he was doing this time, God only knows. But anyway, so that was dumb. What else? Okay, let me finally get into these character stories, because this is probably the worst aspect of the film. These characters made no sense. Now, I will admit, and as I said, they did set up, like, this establishment of this Kirk and Spock character was done really well, but then it kind of went all to shit once they got to the academy or whatever where they were at, because they established that, as I said, this Kirk is the Spock guy. Kirk actually hates because he made him take this test he didn't want to take, and he stole his girlfriend. The girl he wanted to get with is actually already with him. So these guys hate each other, and then he meets like the old version of him, and then all of a sudden, and then he makes Spock beat the crap out of him. He like enrages him for some reason, and so he could take command of the ship. That part was really dumb. It made no sense. But anyway. So these are two enemies, and then all of a sudden, towards the end of the film, like Kirk says something nice about his father, how his mother died, and then they beam together in the ship, and then all of a sudden they're the best of friends. What? What? That makes no fucking sense. And the whole way is like, Kirk's the captain, and Spock's the first officer, and then he's the captain, and he's the first officer, and then he's the captain, first officer. Well, I thought these were kids. They're cadets. They're in school. Why are they captaining a starship and trading off between captain and first officers? This whole universe makes no sense. Like, this whole Starfleet and Federation or whatever it is, like, this is not a very well thought out concept. It just seems like, to me, they just wanted to say, hey, here's this military organization, we'll just throw it in there, we'll not even think about how it functions or how it works or I guess they have no like really chain of command. It's just in everyone, whoever's sick, the other person can come in and take over. I mean, the whole thing was very well thought out. I mean, poorly thought out, sorry. And it makes no sense whatsoever. But anyway, the character development makes no sense. This is one of the worst. I think this is actually the film's biggest failing. How I can't understand why people don't see this movie. They're bedazzled by the opening scenes, which work, but they don't acknowledge that there's no character journey for Kirk. His character journey, I mean, they try to present one, but it makes no sense, and it's done so clunkingly, and it was more about having these flashy action scenes and obliterating CGI diarrhea, and not rather than focusing on any coherent character story. I mean, in a character story for Spock, as I said, it's a really strong setup, but then towards the end, it's like, things just happen too fast, and that gets me to my next main point, is the plot. This is like one of the worst paced plots I've ever seen. The story pacing is really off. This is just a poorly written script, because it's just, as I said, the setup's good, but then we get into like things just happen too fast. Like the Vulcan Spock's homeworld, that just gets destroyed. It's just like, that's destroyed. That seems like it happened way too fast. I know this ship's like from the future, but they're supposed to have this fleet of armada that like police the galaxy, and yet they just get wiped out instantly, and they seem really incompetent. That this little, cadet Kirk was the only one who was able to figure out, hey, maybe we're going into a trap. I mean, it all happened too easily. It all happened too fast. I don't buy this universe at all. It just doesn't come off. It just doesn't make any sense. And the whole story structure was just like, it was, as I said, it was centered around having these action set pieces flow right into another, and there's no coherent like character story, there's no coherent like through story. And that brings me up to my next major point, is the villains in this movie, like Nero, are dumb. Like, these are some of the flat, most two-dimensional villains that I've ever seen, like, in any movie ever. Like, I already talked about how Nero's motivation makes no sense. How instead of, like, actually saving his own world, he just wants to kill people. And a lot of his actions are sort of passed up as, he's crazy, I'm crazy. And the way he talks, like, when, Pike would ever introduce that, like, I'm Christopher Pike, blah, what are you doing here? And he's like, hi, Christopher, I'm Nero. And just, like, the way he talks sounds really goofy, and, like, they're trying to make him be like this modern day like psychopath or something, and he just sits there when other people are talking, all of a sudden he'll just and kill people. I guess he's supposed to be scary, but it's just, he's so flat. He's so mustache twirly. Like, the best villains in fiction are the ones who you can understand them. You can understand the motivations. They have a character development that's just as good as the heroes, which in this film, to be fair, the hero's character development sucks too. But, yeah, typically the best villains are the ones who have really strong characterizations, and you can get their motivation. In fact, they're sort of the hero in their own story. His motivations, as I say, make no sense. He's not very well developed at all. You don't understand him in the least. He is just flat, two-dimensional. I'm crazy and I'm gonna kill you, and that's all there is to this character. He's one of the worst written villains, and all of his sort of lackeys just follow him. Why are they following him? I don't know, because they're lackeys and they're idiots. I don't know. Anyway, sorry. Yeah. Let's get to this ending, because the movie ends with, this CGI diarrhea space fest, and they they strike a blow against the ship, but then Nero's ship is getting sucked into a black hole. And all of a sudden, like, after this whole time they've been trying to defeat this, crazy asshole guy, Kirk's like, hey, let me help you. That's felt so disingenuous and so out of character. I mean, I guess it kind of fits into his character if he's just doing that to fuck with him, just to be cruel right before, alright, well, fuck you then, I'm gonna kill you. It's like, maybe having him on. I guess it makes sense from that perspective, but it does seem kind of like the script was kind of make you think that he's a great guy. That's like the hero cliche, I'm gonna help you, and it's just so cheesy here. It just didn't really make any sense. Okay, and then I already talked about how this whole Starfleet or Federation, this organization, makes no sense because they have kids running a ship. But apparently, you can get promoted from, like, being a student, a cadet in an academy, straight to being the captain of the starship. I mean, maybe all the adults got wiped out in that. It still seems like it's kind of a shitty fleet. They must not have had many ships or many people involved if they're able to get wiped out so easily. And where are all the, experienced officers? I mean, I guess they're all doing more important things while their homeworlds are getting destroyed. Whatever. But anyway, they have it's like you get a naval academy. Like, I grew up near the Naval Academy, and, it's like, you have the midshipmen or whatever at the Naval Academy. It's like as soon as they graduate, like here you go, here's a nuclear submarine for you to command. That's basically what they did here. They just said as soon as you graduate, you don't have no officer experience whatsoever. You didn't go through the ranks of ensign, lieutenant, lieutenant commander. You just go straight from graduation to being the captain, commander of like hundreds of people on this starship, and going out and having this massive arsenal at your command, where the Starfleet's their mission objective seems to be to police the galaxy or whatever. But anyway, yeah. So in other words, it's like this whole thing, like it's a fantasy. It doesn't make any sense. It has no realism to it whatsoever, and it's just But anyway, my rating for random space blockbuster, out of 10 is a 5 average. I mean, it did have, as I said, like some moments of this film really worked. Like at the start, with the old Kirk's father dying, like that was a really well designed scene, and some of the Kirk and Spock setup worked really well, and there was some good like humor moments, and there were some good action scenes, like the thing with the drill that was really exciting, really engaging. So I do get why some people would be enthralled with this film on a surface level, but if you look beneath that surface, you see there's a lot of poorly constructed characters, a lot of poorly constructed plot. The film just falls apart if you look beneath the shiny surface of these dazzling action scenes. It's just a collection of dazzling action scenes with sort of no coherency and a poorly written plot. But I'll give it a 5 out of 10 because there are some good elements to it. Anyway, that is it for my review for Random Space Blockbuster. You can check out Magic of Forever, as I will next week. I'll be doing a review of a classic movie, Back to the Future, starring Eric Stoltz, and I'll just read some things recently that apparently they almost fired Eric Stoltz to bring in that guy from Family Ties, the little teenager who played Alex in that sitcom in the 80s called Family Ties. I can't imagine what a disaster the film would have been. I mean, Eric Stoltz, no one could be Marty McFly other than Eric Stoltz. I mean, come on, let's be honest. And of course, his career probably wouldn't have blown up, and he wouldn't have been the mega superstar and starting on his action films afterwards like he did. But, thank God they didn't do that. And later tonight, I'm also going to watch the speech from President Hillary Clinton, see what she's up to in office. I don't like to get into politics, but can you imagine how bad it would be if Trump actually beat her? God, thank God we don't have to live in that world. Anyway, sorry about getting into politics. Anyway, check out my review for Back to the Future, and I'll be covering many other stuff in this channel, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Mike. That was a very interesting review of Random Space Blockbuster. Anyway, back here in the Prime universe, let's talk about Star Trek 2009 some more. And let me get into some more of the details about what I didn't like about this film in particular, other than the generic stuff that Mike already mentioned that could apply to any film. Let me get more into the Star Trek side of things. It relies on supplementary material. I think Mike mentioned this, but the how you have to read a book in order to know what happened to Nero, that Nero actually got captured to the Klingons. I know there's some geeks who try to point this out. Well, in a deleted scene, they show that Nero was being held in a Klingon prison camp. But it's deleted, so it's not in the film, and it's in a book, a novel, a comic book, or whatever. That's not a part of the film. They did have a line. I did notice there was a line where Horace said that she heard something that this Romulan ship destroyed a fleet of Klingons, but that's not really that's feeding into something in the supplementary material. You still need to read stuff that is outside of this film in order to get it. And that's something Abrams did with Force Awakens as well, because he didn't properly explain who the First Order were, and you had to read this other novel. That is horseshit. That, again, it feeds into how this film is nothing but a cash grab, a shameless, devoid of any creativity, artistic value way to try to get money from you. Because it's like, well, in order to know more about the backstory that's happening in this film, you have to read this book. Fuck you, that's not self-contained. Anyway, the other thing is the Uhura and Spock romance. Now, I know people accuse me of being a geek again, or, oh, you're just into Star Trek, you can't get into... But it just doesn't work for the characters. It makes absolutely no sense. So why is it done? Does it help the story? No. Then why is it done? Sex appeal. Unnecessary sex appeal. Something that sort of damaged Voyager, damaged Enterprise. And since this whole film is just about a way to get butts in seats and milk money out of people... let's put this romance between Spock and Uhura. And it's worth noting that the film I do think is the reboot, I think is Star Trek, is Beyond, and they ended that relationship. Anyway, I actually want to talk briefly about the whole thing about reboots, because I know some people, watched some reviews, and people are like, well, it's not actually a reboot because they come up with, it's actually an in-universe reason, because you still say there's this prime timeline that still exists, and the Kelvin timeline exists, so it works within canon. That is just a blowhard excuse. Let's call a spade, let's call an apple, call it what it is. This is a reboot. They just came up with this shameless, bullshit way to try to appease fans and be like, look, it's actually just a parallel universe. But really, when it boils down to it, that's just a bullshit excuse they came up with so they could reboot the franchise. Rather than say, oh, that would be easier to swallow than actually just flat out rebooting. And let's come up with this bullshit in-the-universe excuse, have Spock travel back in time, whatever, and create this alternate timeline, which, by the way, is not how time travel has been established to work at all in the Star Trek universe. The whole concept that if you travel back in time and change the past, you create another universe, that is a sound scientific theoretical theory, but it is never how time travel worked in Star Trek, ever. Has very clearly been established that if you travel back in time in Star Trek and you change the past, then that alters the future. There's no alternate parallel universe. You had changed the future of the prime universe, which no longer exists. The episode Yesterday's Enterprise, one of the best episodes of all of the Star Trek franchise, establishes this. It's not like, oh, we created this other parallel universe where the Klingons and Federation at war. It's like, no, you had altered the future, the one and only timeline, to make it so this is the case. So it goes again. I'm just saying that because this movie goes against established Star Trek in so many other ways, so this is probably the least of its offenses, to be honest. But it goes against the whole core, what's been established in time travel. It's just a bullshit excuse for them to be lazy, and so they can write whatever they want. Anyway. Another way they're like, well, let's try to... We're going to piss off the fans by rebooting it and having these characters not act anything like them because we want to rake in the money and get the general audience butts in seats and make this an action explosion CGI fest. So, let's try to appease the fans with a lot of shameless callbacks. That will make them happy. Apparently it's worked for some people. But like they said, had order a Kardashian drink, even though it's kind of been established in canon that the Federation didn't actually meet the Cardassians until after the original series time, sort of in between the original series and Next Generation, but, let's forget that. And also, we find out how McCoy got his name. He was like, oh, it's my ex-wife left me with nothing but my bones. Except for the fact that bones is actually a term used in like Civil War times and stuff to describe doctors, which is obviously how they were treating it in the original series, because the original series was taking its inspiration from Western, so it was taking a lot of Western themes. And the fact that the Doctor would be called Bones was a theme from Westerns, and not because she left me with nothing but my bones. Now, you could come up with the excuse, well, that's not fair, Mark. It's a combination of both. Maybe Kirk calls him Bones because he said it, and also because it's the name of the Doctor. Maybe so, but it still doesn't change the fact that we don't need to know how he got his fucking name, and that is just a shameless callback to try to be like, see, fans, see? And also, like, the shameless callouts to the Kobayashi Maru, where it's mentioned in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, that, in fact, this, I think, was kind of the whole premise of the film, where they sort of built the film around that. They show what Kirk actually taking the Kobayashi Maru. And it was just so dumb. I really, really, really did not need to see it, and it doesn't really make any sense for the plot. Now, I talked, and Mike sort of talked a bit about how this is just a collection of action scenes with no cohesive plot. If that sounds familiar, that would bring up First Contact, which of course Mike is not aware exists because it doesn't exist in his universe, but exists for me, and I can see the similarities between this film and First Contact. But First Contact actually is better. It actually has a cohesive character stories, as I talked about in my review for that film with Data and Picard. Like, they have through character stories that work. This one doesn't even do that. The character stories for Kirk and Spock make no freaking sense whatsoever, as Mike already talked about. So this this is even worse. Just a collection of action film scenes. Some of them are good, don't get me wrong, but they're just thrown together with no cohesive plot whatsoever, and it astounds me. It's one of the world's mysteries that I shall take to my grave, why all the critics overlooked this. Anyway, okay, I gotta bring up, to me, this line, like Mike already talked about how Nero is such a crappy two-dimensional flat villain, but the thing is there's this line that to me it's like quoting The Room. It's like, oh, hi Mark, I did not hit her, I did not. You quote it because it's funny, because it's so horribly written, it's so horribly performed, it's just such a bad cheesy line. For me, there's a line like this in this film that I love to quote to mock it, because it's so horrible, and it just accentuates how horribly written this villain is, and this whole movie is when Nero was talking to Pike, and Pike's like, oh, Romulus was never destroyed, and he's like, it happened, don't tell me it didn't happen, it happened. I love to quote that a lot, just go around, don't tell me it didn't happen, it happened. It happened. First of all, it portrays how over the top and poorly written this character it was, and how he was just performed like over the top to be a stereotypical crazy, I'm crazy. And that line makes no fucking sense whatsoever when he's saying, don't tell me it didn't happen, it happened. Because Nero's from the future. He's aware that Pike is from the past. He'd be like, a more obvious response would be like, it hasn't happened yet. Or it will happen, or something like that, signifying that it happened in the future. His response here that, don't tell me it didn't happen, it happened, is nonsensical, because it didn't happen yet for Pike. So that is such a stupid line, and it just illustrates how poorly written this character is. To me, it's the same thing of saying, oh, hi, Mark. Don't tell me it didn't happen. It's like both really, really crappy lines. Anyway, that are so bad that they're funny. Anyway, let me get into Scotty. They got Simon Pegg to play him, who's an established comedian, so I guess he's just there for laughs. He's there for comic relief. As Mike kind of touched on this, the character makes no sense. He's just thrown in there and just makes jokes. And, like, why is he given any, like, command? Like, he just pops up all of a sudden he's given, like, control, and now you can transport people and fix the engines and say your classic lines. Oh, I've given her all she got, Captain. Like, oh, that's another callback, fans. But, really, this character is just thrown in there just to be funny. It's one of the most clunky, poorly written ways. And you might be thinking, well, they just want to include Simon Pegg. Again, I'll get to Star Trek Beyond. They have Simon Pegg. They have him be funny. And his character actually works. He actually contributes to the plot. He actually acts like Scotty. But of course, this might have something to do with the fact that Simon Pegg wrote that script. But anyway, Scotty works in that film. I can't remember about Into Darkness, so I'll touch that this week. But I just know that he does not work in this one at all. Anyway, this film is more of a ripoff of the Wrath of Khan than Into Darkness. Or Nemesis, for that matter. And I know a lot of people, ooh, it's true. Like, Into Darkness was very, I'll get to that next week, as I said, but it was very obvious about it. It was very obvious with the shout-outs, and that's why I say it's like a cover band. But to me, what they did here in this film was a lot more shameless, because they tried to present it as if it was something new, which it isn't. This evil guy, it's such a lazy version of the Wrath of Khan too. Like, this evil guy had lost his life, so he blames, in this case, Spock instead of Kirk, because we have to change things up a bit, and blames him for it and wants revenge. Except for as I talked about already, his motivations make no sense whatsoever. Khan's dead. It's just a lazy version of the Wrath of Khan, and of course they throw in shameless Wrath of Khan reference like the Kobayashi Maru. They have cadets, just like the Wrath of Khan had cadets on the Enterprise, and they have the two space battles. It's just, it is worse than Into Darkness in terms of ripping off Wrath of Khan. Anyway. The whole idea of doing a prequel is stupid. Let me just put that out there too. Like, regardless of the whole reboot thing, this comes off as like the Muppet Babies to me. This is like, and the Muppet Babies is okay because that's a kid's cartoon based off of a kid's puppet show, but even though it doesn't make empirical sense that they would have all these Muppets who know each other as adults would also be in the same nursery together and know each other as babies. It's a kid's show, so you just go with it. The suspension of disbelief doesn't quite work for an intelligence franchise that's known for being cerebral, where you take, they might as well just have them kids. They could have have Kirk as a 9-year-old being on the bridge like, I'm the Captain Spock. Oh, this is illogical, those stupid head. It's pretty much the same thing. You have a bunch of teenagers who are still students, they're still at the academy, and they're, you put them in the starship. I know Mike touched on this a little bit too, but how, Pike is the only adult on this ship, and apparently, there are no other adults who could take over, a huge, state-of-the-art ship like the Enterprise that is just handed over to someone who just graduated the academy. And how, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, all the main cast, they all knew each other as teenagers. That's stupid. There have been, non-canon novels that showed, there's one called the Kobayashi Maru that showed, what each one was like, what Kirk was like when he took the Kobayashi Maru, what Spock was, and that book is so much better and more realistic than this shitty film anyway. But, point is, they didn't know each other as kids. That's the whole point. It's kind of ridiculous that they sort of went to the academy together, they graduated together, they were instantly given the ship that they stayed on for 20 years. That defies logic. It's really serendipitous. It's cartoonish, and it's dumb. It is Muppet Baby level. Anyway, let me get to my final point. And I kind of touched on this. I did a whole video about how Nemesis was better in this film. If you want to hear more about that, you can check out that video. Pretty much laid it out. Discovery is better than this film too. And I know a lot of people love to shit all over Discovery and say it's not Star Trek. I'm sorry, but Discovery is Star Trek. This film is not. This is the only film or property or anything with the name Star Trek that isn't Star Trek. This film alone is the only one. Because nothing about it is Star Trek. It spits and all things. Now with Discovery, I had a lot of people saying, well, if it was a parallel universe, they wouldn't be shitting on canon, which is ridiculous because all Star Trek and the existence of Star Trek franchise has always contradicted canon. From the original series, from Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. In fact, in many cases, they did way worse, especially Voyager, way worse of contradicting canon than Discovery ever did, but I might do a whole separate video about that. In fact, that would take me a really long time to get into that because there's so much. So the whole thing about, oh, Discovery's not canon, you're stupid if you think it's canon. No, you're stupid if you think that the Star Trek franchise hasn't always contradicted canon. I'm sorry, but anyway. So Discovery is Star Trek. This bullshit is not. Anyway, my rating for Star Trek 2009 out of 10 is a 2, extremely poor. And you may notice my rating is a lot lower than Mike's rating. And that's because I do have to take in things into account how this is shitting all over the Star Trek franchise. How the fact that they stole the names of established franchise just to get in money makes this a shameless cash grab, which lowers the opinion of Mike, who just realizes that this is a poorly constructed plot with poorly constructed characters, and and the character development makes no sense whatsoever. It's diarrhea of CGI, but it's made worse by the fact that, in addition to that, they're just stealing the name of a good franchise and shitting all over its legacy, not at all staying true to it. Fuck this film, if I haven't been clear on that. Anyway, that is it for my review of Star Trek 2009. Now, the question you're asking yourself now is, Mark, did you grow a beard just so you could do that stupid bit about the parallel universe? And the answer to that question is yes, my friend, I did. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover the rest of the Star Trek films. I only got 2 left to go. And also, I do many other Star Trek videos, and I cover other shows like The Expanse, Game of Thrones, Babylon 5, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.